Shalom, Chaverim, and welcome to the second to last. I really mean it this time. Heartfelt Haftarah. We are coming towards the end. It is the race towards salvation. We will be in the high holidays when this is posted and shared with you, and we are coming to the very end of our journey through the Haftarot. So where are we? Our Torah portion is Ha'azinu, which is the great poem that Moses recites in his final days on the east side of the Jordan before he dies and the people progress into the land of Israel. So Ha'azinu is a classic biblical poem full of parallelism. Almost the entire uh, Torah portion is taken up with Moses's poem. And so, not surprisingly, this is an opportunity for the selection of a haftarah, which is overwhelmingly poetry. And in this particular case, the parallel is between the poetry of Moses and the poetry of King David. If we go to its 2 Samuel chapter 22, we encounter David offering a psalm. Uh, Technically, we can't say that Moses is reciting a psalm because it doesn't appear in the book of Psalms. However, David's psalm here in Samuel does in fact appear in the book of Psalms. So it's a replication of a text, which is very unusual. And so in this particular poem, psalm, what we have is a very, very focused, personal cry of King David, talking about his circumstances and how God intervenes in those circumstances. Now, you know, David was nothing if not a bit of an egotist. So when he talks, he's talking about his particular experience rather than any sort of collective experience, though we can apply it to our own person. And that's one of the geniuses of the Psalms, is that even though oftentimes what we read seems to be set to a particular set of historical circumstances, devoted to a particular historical person, in fact, we can take them and we can generalize them and we can identify them with ourselves. So, what is the Haftarah? Well, it is a long poem, and this is a long Haftarah, but it is David speaking to his heart. He offers praise of God, and then he goes on for an extended period talking about how God protects him in his perilous circumstances. And we know that the early life of David was pretty darn perilous. It concludes with a vision of victory and success and overcoming the hard times, and with an additional praise of God. Now, last week I talked about the divine warrior, and here in this particular poem, remembering David is a warrior in the tribal period of ancient Israel. So he is going to self-identify with, and he is going to make a lot of use of the image as God, as a parallel warrior to himself, a superior warrior, someone who fights for him. And that's what we hear in this particular psalm. So I'm going to draw your attention to the early part of this. Right at the very beginning, 22:1 to 22. Oh, actually, I'm going to go all the way down to 22:6. And it goes like this. When the Eternal had saved him from the grasp of his enemies. This is a superscription. It actually is a statement above the psalm, locating the psalm in a particular historical circumstances. Was that really the origin of this particular poem? We can never know. But the editor of the Book of Psalms ascribed this particular poem to David and ascribed it to a very particular moment in David's personal narrative. When the Eternal saved him from the grasp of his enemies, and especially the grasp of King Saul, David sang this song to the Eternal. He sang, "The Eternal is my rock, my fortress, my refuge. God is my rock where I seek shelter, my shield, the source of my salvation, my deliverer. You save me from violence. Derided, I cry out to God, and I am saved from my foes. The waves of death surrounded me. Destruction's flood frightened me. The bonds of shield closed in upon me. Death's net entrapped me. In my torment, I called to the Eternal. I called to my God." So, clearly a message of someone under stress. Um, the image of the rock and the floods, uh, which is a beautiful image and really a desert image, uh, brings to mind my recent trip to New Mexico, because one of the things I took the boys out to see was one of the pueblos. There are 19 pueblos, or small Indian reservations of settled people who have been allowed to stay in their territory. Not usually the experience of Native Americans. They're usually transferred to reservations remote to where there were originally their stamping grounds. But the pueblos were created really by the Spanish, and the American government just sort of accepted that model. And those people are still exactly where they were 500, 1,000 years ago. And in this particular case, I took them out to Acoma. Acoma is a unique pueblo. It is known as the Sky City. And if you drive west from Albuquerque, you will see that the landscape in the first 50, 60 miles out of Albuquerque is dotted with all these mesas, these flat topped hills and mountains. The way erosion has shaped the landscape is that it has washed away the softer material around these peaks of rocks. And as a result, they rise up almost pillar-like and flattened on the top. And there are many of these mesas throughout that western part of New Mexico. And in this particular case, the Acoma people created their pueblo on top of the mesa. Now, it's mostly a ceremonial top. The people, it's too much of a hassle climbing up and down that mesa each and every day, and certainly to bring water up there. But the people would have been settled on the territory below, which was a floodplain, really a good place to grow food. And if there was ceremonial purposes, or if the community was threatened from external forces, they would all climb up to the top of the mesa, and there was a ready-made village up there for them, where they could retreat or they could worship. And in fact, they, not surprisingly, built cisterns up there to collect water from the rain that would fall. And so there would be a ready supply of water. That's not different, really, from Masada, the fortress on top of a plateau. New Mexico, we call it a mesa, right next to the Dead Sea. So there's a lot of parallels here. And that's really the image that David is embracing, right? The Eternal is my rock, my fortress, my refuge, my Acoma, my Masada, my Sky City, where I seek shelter, my deliverer who saves me from violence. So the image is something that we can still see today in both the ruins of Masada, but also in the living community that is Acoma. And then when you suddenly the shift is to the waves of death surround me, destructions, floods frighten me. Uh, that seems like incongruous, but it's not, because that's how these things would work. If Masada has been carved out in part because all this water comes down when it rains, all this water comes down the Judean hills towards the Dead Sea and strips away the land around the plateau, and has been doing so for millennia. And when you're caught in a flash flood, as I, a New Mexican, realize and have stranded my car in a flash flood, it's pretty damn scary. And exactly those things happen, is that flash floods flow down the floodplains, normally a very safe place, but when the flash floods come, it's chaos, and you retreat up to the hill that is your refuge. So, again, a perfect parallel illustration of what David is talking about. Now, the one thing I do want to draw your attention to is a particular term that is translated here. It is the bonds of Sheol closed in on me, death's net entrapped me. All right. So, what the heck is Sheol? Sheol is a term that is translated in earlier biblical English translations as hell, and literally means in Hebrew the grave. It's the place your body gets buried, but also metaphorically it represents the afterlife. So Sheol is coming for me, or has got me. Now, that is often a puzzling part of the Psalms. We will hear about how I have been sent down to Sheol. I'm already in the grave. I'm dead. And, but you, God, have brought me back. Now, eventually, we would come to translate that idea into the idea of resurrection, that we literally die, we stop breathing and hold our breath forever, and God will physically bring us back from death to life. And that becomes a major metaphor in Jewish tradition and is inherited by Christian tradition, and so on and so forth. However, in its original context, talking about going down to Sheol means something slightly different. And this is the way my teachers explained it, and I think it's a brilliant and correct interpretation. So, in our world, there are three states of being, and those three states of being are healthy, sick, and dead. Right? Easy to follow. And the first two, healthy and sick, are when we're alive. And after we stop breathing forever, we're dead. However, for the ancients, this is how they perceived those three things. There was healthy, alive but still in Sheol. In other words, when you're very sick, and then dead. All right. So sickness is part of the realm of Sheol. Not surprisingly, because in many cases, when you became sick, there was little that could be done for you. You were the walking dead. You were alive technically, but you were at death's door, or even in the realm of death already. So to talk about being in Sheol means to be sick, to be grievously wounded. That is the idea that even though we may be conscious, we may be alive, we are already in the realm of death. And in its original context, that makes perfect sense. So to be pulled out of Sheol is not to be resurrected from being dead, as they would say in The Princess Bride. You're mostly dead, and you're brought back from that. And we can certainly understand that. Uh, but we are so protected against the forces of sickness compared to our ancestors. We don't think of being sick as being on death's door as a general rule. But for the ancients, I mean, you sneeze and everyone says "La Brute," to your health. May you live, because uh, the sneeze seems to be the precursor to a path to death. So it's actually a startling illustration of how good we have it today, that we are not so frightened of sickness as our ancestors were. Our ancestors pretty much felt like when someone got sick, that was it. It's over. Curtains falling. So it's important to understand the rhetoric of the Psalms, where it talks about Sheol and talks about I have been encompassed by Sheol, or I am in the realm of Sheol. Uh, I'm sick. I'm dying. I'm in imminent danger. That's what it means. All right. And the bonds of Sheol closed upon me. Death's net entrapped me. But as David will go on and say, you saved me. You brought me back from death. And that's what's going on in this rhetoric. So it's really a very fine psalm. It's very personal. It's assigned to David's own experience, but it also possesses a kind of universality that we can appreciate. So uh, if we find ourselves gravely ill in the hospital, this is talking to us. We find ourselves on the floodplains, surrounded by death, but God can lift us up to the high mesas of security. So, with that, I'm going to stop and thank you for listening in. And we'll have our uh, finishing Haftarah next week.